Welcome back to the radio. Tonight, your story takes place in the year 2213, where you spend your days archiving human voices in a world that mostly speaks through thought alone. The air around you feels quiet, yet charged with memory, as though sound itself has become a fragile artifact you're meant to protect. It's also one of the few jobs where listening to hours of old rants about laundry and parking doesn't make you nosy, it makes you a professional. Meanwhile, most people can now argue telepathically and finish in under 10 seconds, which feels unfair when you've just sat through a 20-minute recording of someone losing a battle with their coffee machine. So tell me, what time is it on your side, and where are you listening from tonight? Share in the comments, and if you'd like more nights here at Quilloren Radio, subscribing helps. Without further ado, let's begin. You step into the archive building at the start of your shift, and the first thing you notice is the silence. It isn't the kind of silence that demands attention, but the kind that seems to fold itself into every surface, as though the walls, floors, and ceilings have agreed to cooperate in keeping sound to a minimum. The air is cool, and it carries the faint metallic tang of recycled ventilation. The entrance corridor stretches ahead in a straight line, pale glass panels on either side reflecting your figure in softened, muted tones. Your footsteps land against the floor with a subdued weight, producing a gentle rhythm that quickly disappears behind you. Nothing lingers here for long, not even the echo of movement. You keep walking deeper, past a row of humming panels that blink with slow, deliberate light. Each one holds access to preserved voices, tagged and indexed by century, region, and context. The hum is low, steady, like the faint drone of bees from far away. It's less a sound than a feeling in your chest, a vibration that seems to thread itself into your breathing until you hardly notice it anymore. The deeper you move inside, the steadier it feels, as if the hum were a kind of reassurance that everything is functioning just as it should. At one point, you pass beneath a reinforced arch where the lighting shifts. The corridor narrows, the glass gives way to brushed metal, and the air feels denser. You can sense the faint temperature change, the way a room in summer feels just a degree cooler than the hall you left. These are the spaces where the storage units begin, long rows that extend in both directions, lined with doors that each conceal thousands of preserved recordings. You walk slowly, not out of caution, but because the setting almost demands it. Haste would feel misplaced here, like trying to run inside a cathedral. The lights above flicker not with brightness, but with a soft glow, an even wash of pale white that casts almost no shadow. It flattens everything in view, making the long rows of doors appear more like repeating patterns than individual storage spaces. Sometimes, if you stare too long, you get the sense that you're standing inside an infinite loop, corridor upon corridor with no visible end. The trick is to keep your eyes moving, to notice the subtle signs that keep one section from bleeding into the next. A slight scuff on the wall, a tiny shift in the floor's finish, a label tag that doesn't sit perfectly straight. These small imperfections are what ground you, the reminder that this is a real place built by hands that didn't measure everything with perfect precision. You reach the section you'll be working in tonight. The heavy door responds to your presence with a faint click, releasing the seal that holds the chamber in place. You ease it open, and the hinges answer with a soft creak. The sound is modest, but in a facility this quiet, it seems almost intrusive. The creak fades quickly into the distance, but for a moment it reminds you of doors back in ordinary places, kitchen cupboards that never sat right, or an old front door that made a low complaint every time it swung open. Here, the creak feels oddly comforting, like a fragment of ordinary life that somehow slipped into this futuristic space. The chamber you enter is tall, the ceiling rising higher than you expect. The air is cool, circulating in measured currents that brush lightly against your skin. Along the walls are the shelves of playback devices, compact and uniform, each marked with a reference number. Their faces are blank, except for a single recessed light that glows when a recording is active. For now, all of them remain dim, lined up in perfect stillness, as if holding their breath. You cross the chamber toward your desk, which sits neatly against the far wall. The desk is minimal, smooth surface, no clutter, but you keep one or two objects there to soften it. A small notepad that you rarely write in, but keep anyway, and a thermal mug that usually contains something lukewarm by the time you get to it. Both sit quietly in their places, patient and unassuming. You set your things down, feeling the slight vibration of the desk as it adjusts itself to your preferred height. When you sit, the chair greets you with its familiar squeak. It's a faint one, quick and high-pitched, the sort of sound that in another era would have driven office workers into fits of irritation. Here, though, it feels almost like company. Every shift, the squeak is there to mark your arrival. Some people in this century would pay good money for chairs that calibrate themselves without a sound. You, on the other hand, have grown attached to this particular flaw. A squeak in a building of near-total silence has a way of becoming strangely precious. You take a moment to let the stillness settle over you. The hum of the panels in the corridor remains faint in the background, a soft vibration rather than a sound. Inside the chamber, though, there's nothing but the light breathing of the air system and the low, constant awareness of your own body. You notice the rhythm of your breath, the shift of fabric as you move slightly, the quiet thud of your pulse in your ears. These details become more pronounced in a place like this, as though your own body becomes one of the instruments archived here, producing a living sound that no one has yet recorded. From the desk, you can see across the chamber toward the opposite wall. The shelves there look identical to the ones beside you, but at certain hours the light hits them differently, and you can catch a faint sheen across the edges of the devices. Tonight, the glow seems almost golden, as if the wall itself were humming with a stored warmth. It's just the result of the overhead lighting shifting subtly as the power grid cycles through its phases, but still, it gives the room a quality that feels almost ceremonial. Your eyes wander to a row of older storage units near the bottom shelves. These ones are slightly larger, built with thicker casings and mechanical slots that click when they close. They've been around long enough to show their wear, scuffed corners, a dullness on their surfaces where hands have brushed past too many times. They stand out in contrast to the sleeker, newer models above them, but not in a way that feels out of place. If anything, they give the room a certain continuity, like a thread that ties the present back to the earlier days of this archive. As you sit there, a thought drifts through your mind. In a place built for silence, sound has a way of becoming monumental. A single creak, a faint squeak, the soft hum of machines, each one feels amplified, important. Even the way your thermal mug clicks when you set it down seems like a kind of announcement. It makes you wonder how different this would feel if the building were filled with chatter, if voices spilled from every corner, and conversations overlapped into a constant buzz. Would you still notice the tiny details then, or would they dissolve into the background the way they used to in busier times? The answer doesn't come. Instead, the room simply holds steady in its quiet equilibrium, and you lean back in your chair, letting your body adjust to the pace of this space. The hum outside, the creak of hinges, the squeak of the chair, each sound claims its place, and then disappears, leaving the silence to knit itself together again. Somewhere, a distant ventilation unit clicks on, releasing a gentle stream of air that drifts slowly into the chamber. It carries the faint scent of dust, not unpleasant, but noticeable in its simplicity. Dust smells different in a place like this. It isn't the musty heaviness of a forgotten attic, or the acrid tang of machinery gone too long without cleaning. It's lighter, cleaner, like the scent of paper when you first open a new notebook. You breathe it in, and the scent fades almost as quickly as it arrived, replaced once again by the neutral coolness of conditioned air. Sitting there, surrounded by stillness, you realize how much the environment shapes your pace. The world outside this building may move at extraordinary speed, with thoughts transmitting faster than words, decisions made before a single sound escapes a mouth. But in here, every detail insists on patience. The slow shift of air, the steady hum, the gleam of light across shelves, all of it unfolds at a rhythm that cannot be hurried. And so, without needing to decide, you fall into step with it. The quiet accepts you, as it always does, and you begin the work of this night's archive shift. The first sound of the evening is small, almost nothing, just the gentle click of a playback device as you set it into motion. Yet in the silence of the archive, it spreads out like ripples in water. A soft whir follows, the kind of mechanical murmur that is more felt than heard, and then a voice drifts into the room. It's faint at first, tinny with age, but clear enough to carry across the chamber. The voice is speaking a greeting. Ordinary words, something along the lines of, "Good morning," or "Hello there," spoken in a tone that carries no urgency. The quality of it is striking in its simplicity. There's a brightness to the sound, as if the speaker had leaned close to a microphone decades ago, unaware that their voice would someday be preserved as part of history. You lean back slightly in your chair, listening, and notice how the words fill the air differently than the hum of the machines. Voices carry texture, depth, tiny imperfections that feel impossibly human against the backdrop of mechanical precision. As the voice continues, you notice a particular cadence, the rise and fall of syllables that feels strangely familiar. Something about it presses lightly against memory, like the brush of a scent you can't quite place. It pulls at you, and before you realize it, your mind has followed the thread backward, tracing the sound into an older, quieter corner of your life. You're no longer in the archive chamber, not entirely. Instead, you're back in a small cafe that used to sit on the corner of a tree-lined street. It's early morning, the kind of morning where the air still holds the dampness of dawn, and the smell of roasted beans drifts warmly through the room. The cafe's floor is uneven, made of worn wooden planks that creak in the middle if too much weight leans on them. You remember the exact feel of those creaks under your shoes, a kind of unevenness that somehow made the place more endearing. The voice you heard in the archive mirrors the tones that filled that cafe. People spoke there in the same casual rhythm, greetings exchanged at the counter, quick thank yous murmured over steaming mugs, and the soft murmur of conversations at tables that seemed to belong to regulars. The memory unfolds slowly, drawn out not by drama, but by atmosphere. You can hear the clink of ceramic cups against saucers, the faint hiss of milk steaming, the low hum of a refrigerator hidden behind the counter. At a nearby table, two people are quietly debating which bus line will get them to work faster. Their discussion is earnest, but calm, the kind of everyday deliberation that feels almost ceremonial in its routine. You catch yourself smiling at the thought. In this year, most people can calculate transit routes with a thought in less than a second, and yet something about those slow, spoken deliberations seems richer. It wasn't efficient, but it had texture. One person would misremember a detail, the other would gently correct them, and both would reach a conclusion that felt earned simply because it took a little longer. You shift slightly in your chair, still in the present, but the memory is so vivid it feels as though the smell of coffee has briefly invaded the archive's recycled air. The warmth of that cafe lingers, not in a nostalgic way, but in the sense that it's an anchor, proof of how voices once occupied ordinary spaces. Across the room in the cafe, someone laughs softly, the sound rolling upward like a slow wave. It's not a loud laugh, not the kind that draws attention, but one of those understated reactions that's almost more about breath than voice. You remember noticing how easily such a sound could shift the mood of a room. One laugh would ripple outward, pulling a smile from the person across the table, and suddenly the whole space felt lighter. In the present, the recording continues its greeting, winding toward the end of its stored segment. The memory holds a little longer, though, as if unwilling to give up its place. You let yourself stay there, in that cafe, tracing small details. The way the light fell unevenly across the counter, highlighting dust motes that moved gently in the air. The way the barista kept a cloth draped over one shoulder, even when they weren't using it. The way the chairs never quite sat evenly on the floor, wobbling slightly until you found just the right angle to settle them. These are not dramatic recollections, but they form a complete world, as vivid as the one you now sit in. What lingers most is the way voices filled the gaps. Without them, the cafe would have been nothing but clinking dishes and the hiss of steam. The voices gave it shape, connected one table to another, made the space alive in a way that silent thought could never fully replicate. People spoke not just to exchange information, but to leave small traces of themselves hanging in the air. Back in the archive, the playback device clicks softly, marking the end of the recording. The voice falls silent. For a moment, the chamber feels emptier, as though the air has expanded to swallow the absence. You glance at the shelves, at the hundreds of silent devices waiting their turn, and you wonder how many fragments like that cafe exist in them, how many ordinary mornings, how many unremarkable conversations, how many voices carrying their weight in breath and rhythm. The cafe memory dissolves slowly, not in a sudden break, but in the way fog lifts as the sun warms it. One detail after another slips back into stillness. The clink of dishes fades, the smell of coffee thins, the uneven floor evens out into smooth archive tile. You find yourself once more in the chamber, the cool air pressing gently against your skin, the silence reasserting itself like a steady hand. And yet the residue of the memory stays with you. It isn't sharp or insistent, just a quiet echo that hovers at the edge of thought. It's in the way your breathing feels a little warmer now, or in the way you notice your own voice more keenly in memory, as if listening for its shape against the silence. You don't hold on to the cafe itself so much as the impression it left, a reminder that voices once carried the weight of mornings, and that they still can, even in a world where thought does most of the talking. You reach forward and stop the playback device, its light dimming back to rest. The chamber exhales with you, the air steady, the silence whole again. You lean back in your chair, and though the cafe is gone, the faint warmth of its memory remains with you, quietly tucked into the present moment. You adjust the chair slightly, the faint squeak marking the start of the next stretch of quiet work. A row of playback devices waits in front of you, each one filled with voices from another time. Before you can select the next, though, you hear the soft sound of the chamber door opening. It's not loud, more of a polite announcement than an interruption, the kind of sound a door makes when it knows it has entered a space where silence is valuable. A coworker steps inside, carrying a tablet tucked under one arm. They don't speak immediately, which makes sense considering most people here default to thought transmission. But this coworker, like you, occasionally chooses to speak aloud. They say your name in a tone that feels steady, grounded. You glance up, and the air shifts just slightly with the presence of another human voice. "Morning," they add, even though it's very much evening. You answer the same way, because time-of-day greetings have long since lost their accuracy, but not their usefulness. The exchange is brief, but it carries a kind of weight. Two voices brushing against each other, in a space where silence usually holds all the authority. They set the tablet down on your desk, tapping the edge lightly with their finger. You've got a batch flagged for re-indexing. Nothing serious. Just a few tags that need correction. Their words move at a calm pace, each syllable steady, as though they know there's no need to hurry. You nod, thanking them, and the two of you sit for a moment in companionable quiet. The silence is not empty. It's shared, like a bench in a park where you don't need to fill the air to feel company. The hum of the machines seems softer with another person nearby, and you realize how easily silence can transform depending on who's in it with you. Alone, it feels expansive, heavy, sometimes even overwhelming. With someone else, it feels lighter, like the air itself has agreed to carry part of the load. After a pause, your coworker says, "One of the recordings in that batch is funny. I previewed it by mistake." Someone left a full 30 seconds of themselves coughing before they actually started speaking. Their voice carries a faint trace of amusement, not loud but present. You smile, leaning back in your chair. "That's dedication," you reply. "Most people would stop the recording and start over." This person thought, "No, the cough stays." Your coworker chuckles quietly, the sound like fabric being shaken out. Maybe they thought it gave the message authenticity. The two of you let the idea sit there, the image of someone intentionally leaving their coughs in an archival recording. It's a small absurdity, but in this space, even minor humor feels like a gift. A cough preserved forever, indexed neatly alongside centuries of more purposeful speech. Somewhere in the database, a tag now exists that reads, "Subject begins message after prolonged coughing fit." Your coworker gathers the tablet again and moves toward the door. Before leaving, they glance back and say, "Don't let the chair squeak drive you mad." The dry comment lands perfectly, because it acknowledges what both of you have been hearing without ever saying it out loud before. The chair squeaks, every shift, every lean, every tilt. It's a familiar companion, but it's also impossible to ignore. You answer, "It's part of the atmosphere. Without it, I'd probably forget I'm alive." The coworker nods solemnly, as though you've made a profound point, and then leaves the chamber. The door seals behind them with its quiet click, returning the room to stillness. The interaction was small, barely a handful of words, but its effect lingers. The sound of another person's voice stays suspended in the air for longer than the actual conversation lasted. It's not the words themselves you hold on to, but the weight of them, the presence they carried. A few minutes later, as you begin reviewing the flagged recordings, you hear another voice, this time faint and filtered through the building's intercom. It's the custodian making their usual round. They speak slowly, announcing their pass through the corridors. The words are the same every evening, a short procedural phrase about maintenance, but the familiarity of it makes you pause. There's comfort in consistency. You never see them, only hear the voice floating briefly into your chamber before fading again. It reminds you of old radio DJs who used to announce the time on the hour, voices marking the rhythm of the night without ever stepping into the room. You keep working, pulling up one of the older files. The voice that plays is cracked with age, a recording from the mid-21st century. It begins with someone testing the microphone. "Is this thing on?" They say it twice, the second time louder, before finally starting whatever message they meant to leave. It's strangely funny to hear such hesitation preserved. You can't help but think of how in this century, people don't hesitate at all. Thoughts transmit instantly, fully formed, free from the stumbles and starts of spoken words. Your chuckle escapes without you meaning it to. The sound bounces off the walls, brief and unceremonious, but it fills the chamber all the same. The room feels less rigid afterward, as though laughter itself has stretched it open a little wider. Not long after, there's another visitor. This time, it's someone dropping off a box of unprocessed recordings. They don't come in fully, just linger at the threshold, holding the box against their chest. They ask, "Where do you want these?" Their voice is neutral, efficient, but still carries warmth by virtue of being spoken at all. "Right by the desk is fine," you reply. They set the box down gently, the scrape of cardboard against the smooth floor joining the archive's small catalog of sounds. Before leaving, they add, "Careful with the weight on the bottom." One of the containers rattles. Then they're gone, door closing softly behind them. For a moment, you picture opening the box and finding not recordings, but something completely unrelated. Fruit, perhaps, or mismatched shoes. The idea makes you smile, though you know it's only spools and drives inside. Even so, the thought is enough to make the silence feel less stern. The evening drifts forward, with these gentle interactions anchoring it. Each small exchange breaks the stillness without disrupting it, like pebbles dropped into a calm pond that returns to glass just moments later. You realize that this is how connection works here, in small doses, in light touches, never overwhelming but always present. Words spoken aloud are rare enough now that even the simplest greeting feels memorable, as though each syllable carries a kind of quiet gravity. By the time the chamber settles back into its usual stillness, you feel a soft sense of company lingering in the air. The coworker's dry joke about your chair, the custodian's brief announcement, the delivery person's careful instruction, all of them stay with you in fragments. Together, they form a map of human presence inside this building, proof that even in an age where thought reigns, the old rhythms of speech haven't fully disappeared. And so, you return to your work, the silence now companionable rather than solitary, carrying the faint echo of voices that passed through it. You let the silence return, the faint hum of the archive settling into its steady rhythm again. The flagged batch of recordings sits in front of you, but before you begin, your thoughts drift away from the present. They don't go far at first, just brushing against the edges of memory, and then, without much effort, they pull you back into an earlier time. This was before the archive, before voices became something you cataloged and preserved. You remember a different kind of work, ordinary, unremarkable, but shaped by its own sounds. The place was an office, the kind that relied on both screens and voices, long before thought transmissions became the standard. Rows of desks stretched across a wide room, each one topped with the same generic monitor, the same stack of files, the same pen that barely worked when you needed it most. The air was always a little too warm, thick with the combined presence of dozens of people who all seemed to talk at once. Voices filled that space constantly. Some spoke into phones, their words clipped and rehearsed, repeated so many times they became almost interchangeable. Others leaned across desks to trade quick questions, their sentences punctuated by the tapping of keyboards. The air held the sound of laughter, too, though it was the kind that arrived in short bursts, usually when someone told a joke that wasn't nearly as funny as they believed. You can still hear the way it rolled awkwardly across the room, a small reprieve from whatever task was at hand. Your own role in that office wasn't glamorous. You worked with numbers mostly, checking rows of them for mistakes and shuffling them into the correct places. The work was tedious, but it had its rhythm. The hum of machines, the scratch of pens across paper, the sigh of printers spitting out pages, all of it made a kind of background music that carried you through the hours. You didn't love the job, but you didn't hate it either. It was simply what the day required, and the days passed without much resistance. There was a break room at the far end of the floor, tucked into a corner where the walls met at an odd angle. The machine that dispensed coffee there was older than anyone cared to admit. Its buttons faded, and its internal hum louder than the one in your current archive chamber. The coffee it produced was thin and slightly bitter, but everyone drank it anyway, as though taste didn't matter so much as the act of holding something warm in your hands. You can still recall the way conversations sounded in that break room, not deep discussions, but casual remarks about weather, errands, and weekend plans. They were ordinary words, and yet they carried a kind of comfort. At the time, you didn't realize how much those voices mattered. They blended together, unremarkable, a steady stream of noise you often wished would quiet down so you could focus. Yet now, looking back, you see how those sounds were part of the fabric of life. Each voice stitched itself into the environment, weaving a net that kept the space from feeling hollow. You remember one coworker in particular, someone whose desk was always cluttered with papers that never seemed to find their way into proper folders. They had a habit of humming under their breath whenever they worked through a problem. The tune wasn't consistent. Sometimes it was a half-remembered melody from a song on the radio. Other times it was just a series of vague notes strung together without structure. It was distracting then, but now, thinking back, you realize how much that sound gave the office its character. Without it, the place would have been flatter, quieter, and far less human. And then there was the elevator, which never quite worked the way it should. It groaned and clicked every time it carried you between floors, the sound so familiar that it became a joke among the staff. Someone once claimed the elevator was haunted by the voices of past employees, trapped forever between the first and second floor. You laughed at the time, not because you believed it, but because the idea of voices echoing endlessly inside a machine felt absurd. Now, in your current role, you can't help but think about how close that joke came to describing your daily reality. The memory shifts again, landing on a small, ordinary moment. You're sitting at your desk, late in the day, and the office has begun to empty. The voices that usually fill the room have thinned, leaving only a few scattered conversations. The hum of machines grows louder in their absence, and for the first time, you notice how much the silence changes the feel of the space. It's not uncomfortable, but it feels different, almost unfamiliar. You remember thinking then that the office didn't quite belong to you without the voices of others filling it. Looking back, it's clear now that this chapter of your life carried you here in quiet increments. You didn't plan to end up archiving voices, but perhaps the seeds were there all along, in the way you noticed the sounds of others, in the way silence unsettled you, in the way you stored away the small cadences of everyday speech without realizing it. The office wasn't dramatic, but it left its mark in the same way dust leaves a soft film on glass, slowly, invisibly, until one day it's obvious. You lean back in your chair in the archive, the squeak greeting you again, and let the memory settle. There's no longing for that time, no ache of nostalgia. It simply exists in you, softened by distance, worn around the edges, like a coin that's been handled too many times. The voices of that office are still with you, not sharp or insistent, but folded quietly into the fabric of memory. You return to the present, the archive chamber waiting in its calm stillness. The playback devices remain lined up in perfect rows, their lights dim, holding their own voices in waiting. The hum of the machines surrounds you, steady and unchanging. You breathe in, and the air feels cool, the taste of dust faint but familiar. The memory fades fully now, not gone, but folded away, leaving only its residue, a quiet awareness that voices, no matter how ordinary, always leave their trace. You glance toward the far side of the chamber, where a single booth stands apart from the rows of shelves. It's not large, just a simple square space enclosed by transparent walls, but it has become the center of your routine. Inside, there is a chair, a console, and a playback device fitted with older-style speakers. Most of the time, the archive runs silently through headsets and personal interfaces, but this booth still plays recordings out loud, letting voices spill into the air the way they once did in daily life. You walk toward it, your steps soft against the floor. The booth greets you with a faint click as the door seals behind you, shutting out the wider hum of the chamber. The interior is quiet, but not sterile. The speakers rest in front of you like watchful eyes, their surfaces marked with tiny scratches that come from years of use. You've run your hand across them more times than you can count, always surprised by how tangible they feel in a world where so much has turned weightless. This booth has become an anchor for you, a place where memory and present blend. The chair inside is firmer than the one at your desk, and it makes no squeak when you shift your weight. At first, you missed that squeak, but over time you grew to appreciate the booth's stillness. Here, nothing interrupts the sound of the voices. When a recording begins, the air itself seems to vibrate, and the words fill the booth like water filling a glass. You press a button on the console, and a recording begins to play. The voice that emerges is calm, measured, speaking in a language that was once common but now feels antiquated. It describes something mundane, a recipe, the preparation of a stew with onions, carrots, and potatoes. The speaker lists each step with care, pausing slightly as if to imagine the texture of the ingredients in their hands. You find yourself listening not to the instructions, but to the quality of the voice. The warmth, the pauses, the slight clearing of the throat before continuing. As the voice fills the booth, it stirs a memory of a kitchen from long ago. You're small again, sitting at a table while someone cooks nearby. The smell of onions softens in butter, filling the air with a sweetness that clings to every surface. The sound of a spoon tapping the side of a pot becomes a kind of punctuation, marking the rhythm of the meal's progress. It's not the stew itself you remember, but the comfort of being surrounded by the sounds that meant someone was caring for you. The recording continues, the voice steady and patient. You think about how strange it is that recipes are still preserved here, centuries later, as though the act of describing a meal held as much importance as political speeches or declarations. And maybe it does. After all, what is more human than wanting to share the steps to make something warm, something that nourishes, something that invites company? You shift slightly in the booth, your hand brushing against the surface of the console. It's smooth in some places, but one corner carries a small chip in the finish, rough against your skin. You've traced that chip countless times, though you never think about it until your fingers find it. It has become part of the space, a reminder that even in this carefully preserved building, imperfection still lingers. That small flaw feels oddly important, like the squeak of your chair or the coughs preserved in the recordings. Without it, the booth would feel less real, less grounded. The voice on the recording drifts toward its conclusion, summarizing the final steps of the recipe. The speaker sounds pleased, as though certain that whoever hears these words will sit down to a satisfying meal. When the playback ends, the silence in the booth feels different than before. It's not empty, it's seasoned. The air seems to hold on to the vibrations for a moment longer, carrying the faint echo of a voice that belonged to someone who has long since disappeared from the world. You sit quietly, allowing that silence to settle. This booth, this small space, has become a kind of companion over time. Its walls know the weight of countless voices. Its air has been shaped by syllables and pauses that no one outside will ever hear again. You feel almost protective of it, as though your role is not just to maintain recordings, but to keep this booth alive as a place where voices are still allowed to breathe. You think about how strange it must look from the outside. A person sitting in a glass box, listening to air vibrate with the sounds of people long gone. To anyone passing by, it probably appears uneventful, maybe even dull. Yet to you, this booth is alive with detail. Every recording you play is another thread in a tapestry that stretches across centuries. Each voice adds a layer, not building toward a conclusion, but expanding the depth of what it means to exist in sound. At times, you've wondered if the booth itself has memory. Not the kind stored on drives or cataloged in files, but something softer. Could the walls remember the vibrations that pass through them? Could the chair hold the weight of all who sat here before you? The thought is both fanciful and comforting. Maybe this is why you return to the booth so often, not just to hear voices, but to sit inside a space that has quietly listened for longer than you have. The idea makes you smile faintly. If the booth did keep its own memories, they'd probably be less dramatic than you imagine. Most of its hours are filled with recordings of people reciting shopping lists, practice speeches, or lullabies sung off-key. Hardly the stuff of legends. And yet, that's exactly what makes it valuable. It's ordinary, like the chipped console, like the coffee machine in the old office, like the uneven floor in the cafe. These are the details that hold life together, unnoticed until time polishes them into something precious. You lean back, letting the booth cradle you in its stillness. The memory of the kitchen fades, but the residue stays with you. The warmth of voices, the rhythm of small imperfections, the comfort of a space that accepts them all. This booth isn't just equipment. It's a place you return to, night after night, because it reminds you that sound is more than data. It's texture, presence, the invisible thread that ties one life quietly to another. When you finally rise, you glance once more at the speakers, the console, the chipped corner. You know you'll be back here again soon. For now, though, you leave the booth, stepping back into the cool silence of the archive chamber, carrying its memory with you like an anchor in your chest. If you've been enjoying this story so far, I invite you to subscribe to Quilloren Radio. Each night brings a new sleep story, always paired with an hour of gentle rain to help you drift deeper into rest. Subscribing makes sure you never miss the next quiet journey waiting here for you. You return to your desk after leaving the booth, the soft squeak of your chair greeting you as you settle in. The hum of the archive remains steady, a low vibration that threads through the chamber like a background note in music. For a while, you focus on the next set of recordings, tagging them with care, adjusting small details, letting the voices flow past you without pulling too much attention. But slowly, as sometimes happens in long stretches of stillness, your thoughts drift away from the work. They drift toward the lives not lived, the paths that hovered at the edges of your choices but never became real. It isn't regret that comes to you, not exactly. More like curiosity, a wondering about versions of yourself that stayed behind at other crossroads. You think of the times you could have gone in a different direction, not grand, sweeping decisions, but the small, subtle ones that felt almost forgettable in the moment. For instance, there was a time you considered training as a teacher. You remember sitting at a desk with the application form in front of you, pen poised, ready to fill in the boxes. You imagined yourself in a classroom, speaking to rows of faces, guiding them through ideas, listening to their questions, and answering aloud. The idea of it had a certain warmth. Yet you folded the paper, set it aside, and went to work elsewhere. That life stayed unopened, like a letter never mailed. Now, you wonder what it would have felt like to stand in front of those students, your voice carrying across a room, shaping the silence with words. Then there was the time you nearly moved to another city. You had researched apartments, looked at maps, even pictured the sound of your footsteps on new sidewalks. But when the time came, you stayed where you were. The move never happened. You can't remember now why you decided against it. Was it convenience? Fear? Or simply inertia, the gentle gravity that keeps most people in place? Either way, the city remains a faint shadow in your mind, a place you know only through photos and possibilities. You wonder what your voice might have sounded like walking those streets, asking for directions, greeting neighbors, saying hello to the person at the corner store. Your thoughts shift again, landing on an old dream that once seemed close at hand. There was a time when you considered learning to play piano. You even touched the keys once, letting your fingers fall clumsily against their smooth surface. The notes you made were uneven, awkward, but they carried a promise. You thought maybe with practice you could bring out something beautiful. Instead, life moved on, and the piano remained untouched. The thought of it lingers, even now, not as an ache, but as a question. What would it have been like to sit at those keys day after day, to shape sound with your own hands? You smile faintly at the thought, because you can almost imagine it. Evenings spent fumbling through simple melodies, the room filled with hesitant notes, neighbors politely ignoring your mistakes. And eventually, perhaps, something smoother, something more whole. Now, when you think about it, the image is both tender and humorous. You picture yourself getting winded after a single round of fast scales, pausing to catch your breath like someone who ran too far up a hill. It would have been clumsy, but it would have been alive. The chair squeaks as you shift again, pulling you back into the present. Around you, the archive holds steady, silent except for the hum of machines. You think about how different your life might have sounded if one of those unopened versions had unfolded. Not better, not worse, just different. Would you still be surrounded by voices? Would you still care about the texture of sound the way you do now? Or would your days have been filled with something else entirely? The laughter of students, the echo of footsteps in a new city, the hesitant notes of a piano. The question settles in your chest, not heavy, but persistent. Did I wait too long? Could I still do it somehow? The thoughts hover without urgency, like leaves circling in the air before finding the ground. You don't chase them. You simply let them move around you, their motion gentle, harmless. You think about the way life works now, in this year, when most communication happens without voices. Thoughts pass instantly, efficiently, leaving no stumbles, no hesitation, no coughs or laughter to interrupt the flow. It's seamless, yes, but also smooth in a way that sometimes feels too polished. The rough edges of speech, the ums, the pauses, the mispronounced words are gone. And perhaps that's part of why these what-ifs matter. They aren't just about choices, they're about sound. They're about how those versions of you would have spoken, how they would have left traces in the air, how their voices would have filled the silence differently. The archive around you feels almost like a mirror of those unopened lives. Each recording holds a world that once was, a version of reality preserved in sound. Some are as ordinary as shopping lists, others as tender as bedtime stories. Each one carries a path that belonged to someone else, but in their ordinariness, they remind you of your own paths, the ones you walked and the ones you didn't. You rest your hands on the desk, palms flat against the surface, and breathe in the cool air of the chamber. The hum of the machines continues, steady and unbroken. The what-ifs don't resolve. They never do. Instead, they linger like faint shadows at the edge of light, present but not insistent. You find a certain peace in letting them remain unanswered. After all, not every path is meant to be walked. Not every note is meant to be played. Some exist only as possibilities, and that, too, is part of being alive. Still, the thought of the piano lingers longer than the others. You picture the keys again, black and white, stretching forward like a promise. You think about how they could still be learned, even now, though the image makes you laugh softly. You would be a beginner in a world that has long since moved past instruments, your clumsy scales echoing in an age where most people never open their mouths to sing. Yet the humor of it is gentle, almost comforting. Maybe that's what makes the what-if feel safe, knowing that even if it never happens, the idea itself carries warmth. The archive hums on, steady, indifferent to your musings. You sit quietly, letting the thoughts drift, holding them not as regrets but as soft curiosities. They stay with you like half-remembered melodies, simple and unresolved, but not unwelcome. The box that was delivered earlier still rests by your desk, sealed neatly at the top with a strip of faded adhesive. You draw it closer now, the cardboard rasping faintly against the smooth floor, and lift the lid. The sound of the tape pulling free is rough, louder than you expect in the silence of the chamber. It feels almost indecent, as though you've startled the air from its calm. Inside, the recordings are stacked carefully, each in its own container. Some are sleek and modern, their surfaces smooth and unlabeled, marked only with reference numbers. Others are older, their cases yellowed slightly with time, handwritten tags attached to them in fading ink. You reach in and take one of the older containers first, the weight of it solid in your hands. When you press play, the voice that emerges is warm and casual. It's someone leaving a greeting for a friend. "Hey, it's me. Just checking in." They ramble for a bit, talking about their morning, the weather, something about traffic. The words don't matter much. It's the rhythm that catches you. The small pauses, the way the speaker seems to smile in the middle of a sentence. It's a fragment of life, ordinary, unpolished, and somehow perfect. You stop the playback and return the container to the box. Then you pick up another, this one slimmer and lighter. The label is smudged, the handwriting barely legible, but you can just make out the word song. You press play again, and a voice fills the chamber with an off-key melody. It's not long, just a few lines of what sounds like a lullaby. The singer hesitates once, then laughs at themselves before starting again. You feel the smile pull at your own face. Somewhere in the archive, this recording is categorized simply as song, but here in your hands it feels alive, a person's attempt to capture comfort in sound, mistakes included. You set that one aside and reach for a third. This one crackles faintly as it plays, an older medium transferring its contents into the air. The voice that speaks is careful, measured, like someone reading instructions. You realize after a few moments that it is, in fact, instructions, a detailed explanation of how to assemble a piece of furniture. The speaker pauses often, rustling papers as they search for the next step. At one point, they lose their place entirely and mutter something about starting over. You laugh softly, picturing the frustration that must have followed when the pieces didn't line up the way the instructions promised. Another container reveals something smaller, stranger. The playback begins with silence, and then suddenly, a sneeze bursts out, sharp and unplanned. There's a pause afterward, followed by a chuckle, as though the person knew they'd captured something ridiculous and decided to keep it anyway. You wonder if they meant to record something else, or if the sneeze was the entire purpose. Either way, it's preserved now, waiting to be rediscovered centuries later. You shake your head slightly, amused that even sneezes have found their way into the archive's vast memory. You reach for another. This one is heavier, its casing scratched. When it begins, the voice that plays is slow and deliberate. Someone is reciting poetry, their words carrying a cadence that suggests they practiced before pressing record. The poem itself isn't familiar to you, but the rhythm is steady, comforting. You imagine the speaker rehearsing lines in their room, deciding that the poem mattered enough to preserve. Whether anyone else ever listened didn't matter. The act of speaking it into the world was enough. The box still holds more. One by one, you lift each recording and let it spill its fragments into the room. A quick goodbye said in a rush. A parent asking a child to remember their lunch. A brief burst of laughter that ends abruptly, as though cut off mid-sentence. Each piece adds a new layer to the air around you, building not into a complete story, but into a collage. The voices begin to overlap in your memory, not tangled, but woven. Together, they create the sense of a life not tied to one person, but shared across many. This is what the time capsule feels like. Not a container of individual items, but a layered memory of humanity. The box doesn't hold objects, not really. It holds the texture of being alive, greetings, songs, sneezes, laughter, poetry, instructions, and coughs. All of it bundled together, equal in its weight, none of it more important than the other. You sit back for a moment, letting the silence settle again. The chamber feels different now, full but quiet, as if the air still hums with the residue of those recordings. You think about how strange it must seem to an outsider, the way you spend your nights opening boxes and listening to fragments of other people's days. Yet to you, it feels like holding a time capsule in your hands. Not one filled with relics of stone or glass, but one filled with voices, fragile, invisible, yet lasting. You close the box gently, pressing the lid back into place. Your hands rest on the surface for a moment longer, as though sealing the memories inside. The thought crosses your mind that someday, perhaps centuries from now, someone else will open this same box again. They'll listen to the sneeze, the lullaby, the instructions, and the poem, and they'll laugh softly just as you did. The idea makes you smile. The voices don't need to be grand to last. They just need to be heard. The hum of the archive resumes its steady presence. You lean back in your chair, the familiar squeak greeting you once more, and breathe in the cool air. The box remains by your desk, quiet now, but you carry its collage with you, tucked gently into the stillness of the night. The chamber is quiet again, the recordings back in their box, the machines humming in their steady rhythm. You let yourself lean back in the chair, feeling its familiar resistance. Your eyes wander across the dim light of the room, and for a moment you wonder what this space will look like in years you'll never see. A thought surfaces, calm and unhurried. What will become of this archive in 40 years, in 100, in 200? Will anyone still walk into a room like this, sit down in a chair like yours, and press play on voices that feel impossibly distant? Or will the machines themselves have become artifacts, relics to be displayed behind glass while newer minds skip past sound altogether, content with the quiet speed of thought? You glance at the shelf nearest you, lined with containers labeled in neat codes. The handwriting on some of the older tags is faint, curling with age. Will someone in the future look at these with curiosity, the way you now look at a handwritten letter? Perhaps they'll marvel that anyone ever bothered to write things down at all, or that people once relied on fragile tapes and discs to hold something as fleeting as a laugh. You imagine a visitor shaking their head at the strangeness of it, much like you shake your head at a medieval spoon preserved in a museum. Functional, ordinary, and yet somehow untouchable. Your gaze shifts to the walls, smooth and bare, with only the soft glow of the instruments marking the time. Will walls like these still exist centuries from now? Or will the whole structure of a building seem unnecessary in a future shaped by thought? The idea amuses you slightly. People could simply store memories directly, saving space, saving effort. And yet you suspect there will always be someone insisting on physical archives. Someone who prefers the feel of a case in their hand, the sound of a machine spinning as a voice unfolds into the air. The future may forget voices, but surely not everyone will. You wonder if, someday, there will be another archivist like you, someone who still thinks sound is worth keeping. Will they sit in a chair that doesn't squeak when they lean back? It's not an unreasonable wish. The chair you have has squeaked since your first day, and despite dozens of attempts, no adjustment has silenced it. You imagine a distant replacement finally free of that noise, and you can almost hear the future archivist sigh with relief. And then you wonder about the recordings themselves. Will the sneeze you heard earlier survive another century? Will someone chuckle over it 200 years from now, marveling that humans once thought sneezes were funny enough to keep? Or will the recording degrade until nothing remains, the sound lost to static and silence? The thought is both comforting and unsettling. Not everything is meant to last, yet some things last despite expectation. A sneeze preserved for 500 years feels absurd and oddly reassuring. You turn your attention back to the humming of the machines. The hum itself has become part of your routine, part of the atmosphere. Will these particular machines still be here decades from now, their hum unchanged? Or will a newer design hum in a slightly different pitch, unnoticed by most but obvious to anyone who spends their days surrounded by it? You picture a future archivist remarking on how quiet the machines have become, while missing the subtle weight of the sound you hear now. Another question drifts in. Will anyone remember your voice? You spend your days listening to the voices of others, yet you rarely think of your own. Maybe it will be stored somewhere, tucked into a file that no one listens to. Or maybe it will be forgotten entirely, dissolved into the silence of time. It doesn't bother you, not really. The work isn't about your voice. It's about theirs. Still, you can't help but wonder what it would be like if someone centuries from now stumbled across it and paused, listening. The air feels cool against your skin, and you close your eyes for a moment. The quiet allows your thoughts to drift further forward, imagining the archive abandoned. Dust gathering where your hands once rested, machines silent, shelves still heavy with containers no one bothers to open. You picture someone stumbling into the room by chance, brushing off a case and pressing play. A voice from 200 years earlier fills the space again, and for a brief moment, the gap closes. The past touches the future. The thought settles in you with a calm weight, steady and soft. Will humanity still value voices in centuries to come? Or will sound feel like an old language, unnecessary and quaint? You don't know, and perhaps that's the point. The archive is less about ensuring voices remain heard forever, and more about giving them the chance. What happens after is no longer yours to control. You smile faintly at the thought, the kind of smile that comes from acceptance rather than certainty. You open your eyes and glance once more at the box on your desk. For now, at least, the voices still matter. The box holds its fragments, waiting patiently for someone to press play. You let your hand rest lightly on the surface, feeling the faint texture of cardboard against your palm. You don't push further into the future. You don't need to. The questions remain open, suspended like dust in light. The machines hum steadily. The chair squeaks once more as you shift, and the air settles back into its rhythm. Your thoughts soften, still curious, still wondering, but no longer searching for answers. The future remains a quiet possibility, distant and gentle, left to unfold in its own time. The room is steady, the shelves firm in their places, the hum of the archive carrying on with its dependable rhythm. Your eyes follow the glow of a single indicator light, blinking patiently on the nearest machine. Its consistency is almost hypnotic, and you let your thoughts wander. They drift not into memory this time, but into the soft terrain of possibility, the kind of idle imagining that doesn't demand anything from you. You wonder what it would be like if the blinking light had its own personality, responding to your presence. Maybe it would blink more rapidly when you approached, like a loyal pet too excited to hide its joy. Or perhaps it would blink with exaggerated slowness whenever you leaned on the console, as if sighing in mock exasperation at your wait. The thought makes you smirk. A future archivist, interpreting blinking patterns as mood swings, might end up writing a manual about light etiquette. The hum of the machine continues, and you think, what if the hum were musical? Instead of its steady, neutral tone, it might play soft chords whenever you powered it on. Each shelf could be tuned differently, creating a quiet symphony as you moved through the archive. It wouldn't be grand or overwhelming, just subtle enough to make the space feel alive. You imagine yourself leaning back in the squeaky chair, surrounded by faint harmonies, wondering which shelf might be the soprano and which might grumble low like a tuba. Your attention shifts to the box on the desk. What if, when you opened a container, the recording within wasn't just a voice, but a scene? You picture yourself sliding out a disc, and instead of static plastic, a tiny projection flickers up, a kitchen from 3 centuries ago, complete with the faint smell of toast and the clutter of unopened mail. You wouldn't need to guess what the voice was describing, because the space itself would appear. The idea is impractical, of course, but pleasantly absurd. You can almost feel the faint heat of toast lingering in the air, though your desk remains empty and cool. The chair creaks again as you shift, and you let your thoughts drift toward it. What if the chair weren't just a chair, but a quiet storyteller of its own? Each squeak could translate into a word, a sentence, a thought. You lean back and imagine the squeak saying, "Finally you sat down." Another tilt might declare, "Don't lean too far, I'm not insured." You'd have entire conversations with your chair, the two of you debating the merits of cushion, thickness, or proper posture. You chuckle quietly at the image of someone walking past, hearing you mutter, "Fine, I'll sit up straighter," to a piece of furniture. On the shelves, the labels catch your eye. Each one is precise, written with careful intent. You imagine them rearranging themselves overnight, letters shifting into playful words. A row of containers might suddenly spell out a sentence, or leave you a riddle to puzzle over in the morning. The notion is harmless, whimsical, and you imagine future you standing here, coffee in hand, staring at a shelf that boldly spells, "Try the next row." Your gaze wanders to the floor. It's unremarkable, smooth, steady. Yet you think, what if the tiles could shift their colors according to the voices you played? A cheerful voice might coax out a soft yellow glow. A solemn recording might deepen into blue. The sneeze you once heard could spark a bright flash of green, startling and playful. The archive would slowly become a mosaic of tones, mapping human sound into quiet light. You let yourself picture it, the room glowing gently with shades that carry the emotional weight of every voice. Another idle thought drifts in, light and brief. What if the dust in the air weren't ordinary dust at all, but fragments of words long dissolved? Every particle, a syllable from someone's long-forgotten sentence, floating quietly until it lands. You imagine brushing your hand across a surface, scattering half-formed phrases back into the air. Someone in the future might sneeze, not from dust, but from a cluster of stray adjectives. The image makes you smile in a dry, quiet way, the sneeze as the archive's truest expression. You rest your hands lightly on the desk, and your fingers brush the cool surface. What if the desk had its own secret function, able to summon not only voices but the thoughts people never spoke aloud? That could be dangerous, you know. A grocery list with unspoken irritation at the price of apples, a cheerful voicemail that secretly wished for a nap. The idea grows amusing in its absurdity. You'd have to issue disclaimers to visitors. Warning, thoughts may not match words. The machine's hum steadies again, and you close your eyes briefly. Your mind sketches one last quiet fantasy. What if, when the archive finally stopped, the voices didn't fade? What if they whispered gently into the silence, not loud enough to disturb, but just enough to keep the air warm? A soft chorus of ordinary lives, murmuring without end. It wouldn't be haunting, not even unusual, just comforting. Like a crowded cafe where no one notices you, but you feel less alone for the company. You let the thought rest there. The fantasies don't need to be real. They drift in and out like passing clouds, harmless, light, and softly amusing. You breathe, the chair squeaks, the machines hum, and the room remains exactly as it is. The archive continues, unaltered, steady, and safe. The archive holds steady. Machines breathe their faint, unchanging hum. Lights flicker in patient rhythm, their glow softening across the room. You let your hands rest loosely on the desk, no longer searching, no longer reaching for another recording. There is no need. The shelves are still, the air is quiet, and nothing asks anything of you. The chair holds your weight, gently creaking once, and then falling silent. Its sound fades quickly, absorbed by the steady hush of the room. You feel your breath join that rhythm, slow, calm, even. The air seems warmer now, though not by much. Just a shade softer against your skin, like a blanket laid over something already at rest. The desk beneath your palms feels cool, steady. You press your fingers lightly against it, sensing the faint smoothness of its surface. There is nothing sharp, nothing to disturb. The edges are rounded, worn from years of use, and they guide your hands into stillness. You feel no urge to move them. The desk is enough. The shelves remain tall and quiet, their rows unbending. Labels line each one with perfect patience, waiting without expectation. They are content to stay untouched. Each case rests where it belongs, each voice enclosed in silence. They seem to breathe with the room itself, not with urgency, but with presence, steady and whole. Your eyes lower toward the floor. The surface reflects the soft glow of the lights above, dull and muted, without sharpness. You notice the quiet reflection of your own shoes, small shapes folded into shadow. They stay there without motion, part of the space, part of the stillness. The hum of the machine continues, so faint it nearly disappears into your breath. One sound blends into the other, inseparable. The machine breathes when you breathe, and you breathe when it does. The line between you and it softens, until it feels as though there is only one rhythm in the room. The air tastes faintly dry, the kind of dryness that leaves the mouth untouched, clean. It carries no distinct scent, only the neutral stillness of filtered time. You draw it in slowly, hold it, then let it go again. Each release makes your shoulders sink further, lower, softer. You notice the light against the wall. It does not shift, yet it feels as though it grows gentler with each passing moment. Its edges blur, smearing faintly into the corners. Shadows flatten. The wall itself becomes softer, less rigid. It no longer seems to stand separate from the air, but to be part of it, joined without border. Your body leans a fraction deeper into the chair. The chair accepts the weight without question, without sound. The fabric beneath you feels smooth, a little worn, but perfectly steady. You could remain here without change, and nothing would resist. Nothing would remind you to move. The chair, the desk, the shelves, all of them are content for you to stay exactly where you are. Your breath continues its slow rhythm. Each inhale is long, soft, and unbroken. Each exhale carries you further from thought. With every cycle, words loosen their hold. They are no longer needed. They no longer press against your mind. They fall away, dissolving quietly into the air, leaving only warmth and the faint echo of sound. The air grows weightless, the way it does when you stop noticing it. The hum of the machine softens again, blending with silence so smoothly it no longer feels distinct. You do not know if it still runs or if it has vanished into stillness. Either way, there is no difference. The shelves are softer now. They do not stand as separate rows, but blur into one another. Their edges melt with the walls, the floor, the ceiling. What once felt solid becomes gentle, hazy. They are no longer structures to walk between, only shapes folded into the whole. Your breath deepens again. You notice it less with each passing moment. Inhale, exhale, dissolve. There is no need to count, no need to guide. The body knows what to do. The sound of it carries you deeper into quiet, past the need for detail, past the need for words. The lights blur further. Their glow no longer clings to form, no longer outlines. It spreads evenly, faintly, until it belongs not to the bulbs, but to the air itself. The air is lit. The room is lit. Your skin is lit. All of it the same, without edge. The hum is nearly gone now. If it exists, it blends into your breath so deeply you cannot separate them. You no longer try. Sound and silence merge together until neither remains. The chair is no longer a chair. The desk is no longer a desk. The shelves are no longer shelves. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, all of it blurs into the same still fabric, seamless and weightless. Breath, warmth, texture, softness. The air holds you. The space holds you. The room holds you. There is no more motion, no more detail, no more border between what is you and what is not. Breath slows further. Warmth deepens further. The hum dissolves. The light dissolves. You dissolve. Nothing asks. Nothing waits. There is no conclusion. Only stillness. Only rest. Only quiet.